Hello, one and all, Jake here. You are listening to the audio version of this editorial. If you would rather read the text version, please visit the Substack link in the description. I'm 26, and to my own chagrin, I think I'm starting to get to the point where rather than thinking that every individual person is a brand new, mysterious personality with infinite potential for variety, I found myself identifying some specific abstract types of behaviors that I've observed a lot of people engaging in and drawing conclusions about the mental states of those people. Today, I'm going to be talking about one such behavior type, which I'm going to call giving yourself superpowers. Let me demonstrate what I'm talking about with an example and run a hypothetical scenario by you. Suppose some guy, whom we will call Alex, has an in-person job interview scheduled on Saturday at 11 o'clock. Alex lives in a big city and doesn't have a car, and the train schedule for Saturday doesn't line up with what he would need, so he decides to take an Uber into the office. He is a very organized and prepared person who values promptness, so he plans his day around arriving at 10:30. Saturday morning rolls around and things are going smoothly. He orders his Uber with plenty of time to spare. He spends about 5 minutes watching the driver's icon on the app approach his location closer and closer, and right as he is about to turn into the road, the driver cancels the ride. Unfortunate, sure, but Alex prepared for this and waits for the next driver. A new name pops up and things seem promising, but after about 5 more minutes, this driver cancels too. Now things are getting dicey, but as long as this next driver pulls through, Alex should still show up to the interview with a few minutes to spare. Of course, that doesn't happen, and a third driver cancels on him last second. Thankfully, the fourth driver does pull through, but because of an accident on the normal route there, traffic is slower than estimated, and Alex doesn't show up to the building until 11:05. By the time he walks to the correct room and sits down for the interview, it's 10 minutes past the scheduled time for the interview. Alex apologizes and explains to the interviewer the horrible luck that caused him to be late, and thankfully the interviewer is very understanding and tells Alex that it's not a problem at all. This puts Alex at ease, and he proceeds with the interview confidently. After about 15 minutes of your typical job interview fare, the interviewer asks Alex, "What would you say is your biggest strength?" Alex replies, "I'm very organized and a great planner. I always make sure things are done promptly and never let problems fester." The interviewer accepts that response, and after about 20 more minutes of additional questioning, the interview ends. And this is the end of the scenario. Now, the response I have highlighted in this story, if I were the hiring manager listening in on this, would give me some pause about hiring Alex. I am not saying it would be a definite no. If he showed himself to be very competent, professional, and a good fit for the workplace during the rest of the interview, I obviously wouldn't throw that all out of consideration over this response. But to me, it does plant a bit of a yellow flag. Why? Because he gave himself superpowers, and that's a bad sign. I know that a good number of you are probably asking, what the hell are you talking about, Jake? And so let me elaborate. I told this story from a third-person limited point of view from Alex's perspective, but the problem should become a little bit clearer if you imagine the perspective of the interviewer. The very first data point the interviewer learned about Alex was that he was late to the interview. Alex, to his credit, was upfront about addressing that fact, and the interviewer was receptive to his explanation. Anyone could conceivably have their plans ruined by bad Uber driver luck, and there are certainly some sticklers out there for whom that would still be a deal breaker, but I think the majority of people would be more than willing to look past it. However, later, when the interviewer asks Alex about his biggest strength, Alex makes the strong claim that he always gets things done promptly, and herein lies the superhuman part. Everybody makes mistakes sometimes, and even those who are not quite as mistake prone are still sometimes victims of circumstance. Experiencing some bad luck eventually is inevitable. The self-image that Alex is communicating doesn't take this into account, and so astute people are going to question it. Now, the contradictory data point, his tardiness, which the interviewer was previously willing to ignore, is subject to more scrutiny. Aren't there technically things that Alex could have done to get to the interview on time? Maybe he could have taken the bus, gotten a friend to drive him, walked there, skipped some part of his morning plans because of how important the interview is, or simply planned around an even bigger buffer. Yes, he had exceptionally bad luck, but he's claiming to be an exceptionally good planner, and so now the thing that Alex has cited as his biggest strength comes into question. I would like to emphasize here that I am not nitpicking Alex's use of the word always when he should have used usually. The problem still stands even if he said he usually got things done promptly. Namely, he's sticking to a preconceived image of himself even in the face of evidence to the contrary. This should be a bit worrying because there may be instances in the future where he will choose to preserve his own ego over being truthful. For example, let's say a deadline is creeping up on a project he's working on and it's looking like he will have to turn it in late. He might engage in the following thought process. Since he's such an organized and prompt person, he has already done everything in his power to finish it quickly, and so he can't be reasonably expected to finish, and the program manager will have to accept that. The more humble approach would be to be upfront about how things are looking and get as much help on board as possible to accelerate the work. This could even be more sinister. If he thinks of himself as a person who's respectful to women, he might overlook his own capacity to harass his female coworkers and find ways to rationalize some problematic behavior. This is, of course, a massive extrapolation, and I don't believe that it's reasonable to worry about that just based on his response to the interview question, but I'm just trying to illustrate the principle. When it comes to communicating and believing positive things about yourself, you have to be very careful and keep the values of honesty and humility in mind. There are some better ways Alex could have conveyed what he was trying to convey. He could have rephrased his answer to emphasize a different aspect of his organized personality. He could have stated it in terms of his values instead of in terms of his abilities. Or he even could have tacked on a tongue-in-cheek joke acknowledging the apparent contradiction, and I think any of these would have assuaged the concern. However, most people who give themselves superpowers don't realize they're doing it. Hell, I've probably done it a few times, even after becoming consciously aware of and bothered by other people doing it. This example is actually quite subtle. If you start listening for this, you'll find it quite frequently, and it's actually usually way more blatant than this. For example, the instance that inspired this piece was an interview on a podcast where a woman said, "When I get interested in something, I will dive deep and research every little thing about that topic," and then immediately proceeded to state something verifiably incorrect. Here's an assortment of other, more abstract examples. If you've ever heard someone say out loud, "I'm a good person," and it raised your eyebrow, I think this shows that you have an intuitive understanding of the issue. When people say things like, "I'm such a sweetheart, but if you betray me, then you'd better watch out because I will show no mercy," they are smuggling in the premise that they have superhuman discernment of the intentions and priorities of others. When someone says they have literally never argued with their spouse, it would probably be a good idea to assess the parameters they're using to claim this, because that's an extremely strong claim about the strength of their relationship that deserves to be scrutinized. Hint, maybe they're both scared of confrontation. If a salesperson tells you no customer has been unhappy with their purchase, they're actually giving the product superpowers, but you should remain skeptical all the same. People who call themselves empaths think they've been gifted with exceptional empathy skills, which, in reality, seem to be put to work only selectively. Sometimes people give themselves literal superpowers. People think they can read their pets' minds. People think they can tell with certainty if anyone is gay. People think they can sing like an angel only when they're drunk. People think they're simply built different, and the list goes on. And sometimes people will even claim to have superhuman inadequacies as a form of weaponized incompetence. No, you're not such a klutz that you literally cannot do the dishes without breaking them. No, you're not incapable of following a recipe and making food that turns out to be edible. No, you don't have 2 left feet that make you incapable of dancing with your wife. In all of these cases, people are constructing dramatized, exaggerated images of reality and expecting other people to accept them. And it often works. I'm not here to claim that there aren't people who are exceptionally good or bad at things. That much is obviously true. But what I am saying is that people should refrain from believing in and advertising an image of themselves with some exceptional predispositions unless there's a substantial preponderance of evidence for it, preferably that a third party could validate. The fact of the matter is that superpowers do not exist, and so giving oneself superpowers leads to inevitable cognitive dissonance that will be resolved in one of 2 ways. The first is the manifestation of delusions to maintain the image. Let's suppose you look at yourself as a divinely good writer, and then you draft up a manuscript that kinda sucks and give it to an editor to review it. The editor tells you that it sucks. It may be very tempting to simply conclude that your editor just didn't see your vision, and this writing is actually perfectly fine. Taking this further, maybe you give this to 5 other colleagues, and 4 of them agree with your editor, but 1 of them actually likes it. Even though most people don't like it, just the 1 person who does is enough vindication that your superpowered idea of yourself is real. The amount of rationalizations and defense mechanisms a person is able to conjure to maintain their ego seems to know no bounds. In some cases, this can be problematic to others in addition to yourself. For example, what if you think of yourself as an exceptionally nice person? How many people might you mistreat before taking accountability for your own capacity for evil? Now, the amount of deflection someone can engage in is not necessarily unlimited always. It depends on the individual, which brings me to the other way to resolve the cognitive dissonance, the narcissistic injury. Maybe that one person who likes your manuscript just isn't enough, and you realize you are not, in fact, the second coming of Shakespeare. But your entire self-worth was built upon that idea. You don't actually have the superpower you thought you did, and now you're deeply upset. This can manifest itself in many ways. You might get angry at your proofreaders, who are simply the messengers. You might get depressed and feel like you should quit writing. You might lash out by writing overly harsh reviews of others' work. Whatever happens, none of it is healthy. By the way, the term narcissistic injury does not imply that only clinical narcissists are subject to this. Anyone who gives themselves superpowers may fall victim. When your sense of identity is built on a house of cards, the cold, harsh wind of reality can topple it all down in an instant. So what, are we all supposed to just assume we suck at everything forever? No, and this is my point. Just because you don't have superpowers doesn't mean you suck. The first step in avoiding all these pitfalls is realizing that you are not a projected image of yourself, and even if it seems that way, neither is anyone else. We are all human beings with limitations and the capability to make mistakes. When you truly understand and accept this, which may be more difficult than you think, then you'll never have dissonance with reality again. One great aspect of being human is that you are not stuck the way you are. You have the power to learn new things, take feedback into account, and improve yourself. In fact, you already have in some regard, and you deserve to take some pride in that. Now, I'm going to propose a way to maintain a sense of self-worth while still being honest and humble about it. Instead of talking about what makes you great in terms of superpowers, talk about it in terms of values. If Alex had simply said, "I am vigilant about staying organized and I highly value promptness," his response during the job interview would have come across better. If that lady on the podcast simply said that she likes researching things deeply, she still could have left room for the possibility that she was mistaken and taken an opportunity to add qualifiers or correct herself. If you are a writing enthusiast instead of God's gift to literature, maybe you're more willing to take feedback into account to improve your work and keep your passion alive in the face of criticism. Values are things that we strive toward and can make real progress toward without setting an expectation for 100% efficacy. Superpowers are fiction. Values are human. Always remember to stay humble, and thank you